Hey everyone, I'm your host Tom Shaughnessy, and welcome back to Chain Reaction, a research-driven podcast that's a part of Delphi Digital. If you're not on Delphi's research portal, you're missing out on the critical analysis read by the top minds in the crypto space, so be sure to check it out. One quick housekeeping item: nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any security or token, or to make any financial decisions. Hey guys, I also wanted to tell you about ZenLedger, the best tax software for cryptocurrency investors and accountants. It's fast and easy to use, and you can get all of your crypto transactions in one place so you can trade smarter and optimize your taxes. ZenLedger offers 24/7 customer support by phone, email, or chat to help you get your taxes done stress-free, and it comes with a 100% money-back guarantee because they know you'll love it. ZenLedger is giving an exclusive 15% discount to our listeners when you use coupon code CHAIN15. Go to ZenLedger.io, linked in the show notes below, to get started and get your taxes done fast. With that, let's jump into the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm thrilled to have on David Vorick, who's CEO, co-founder, and lead developer of Sia. David, how's it going?
Hi, going well, and it's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. So, decentralized storage, definitely a hot topic. Tell us a bit about yourself before we dive in.
Yeah, so I've been in the cryptocurrency / Bitcoin industry since 2011. I discovered it as a freshman in college, and it really sucked me in. It's this perfect combination of like cyberpunk / cypherpunk and economic theory and computer science, which are all things I was super into at the time, and then continue to be into today. So yeah, when I learned about Bitcoin, my life took like a hard right turn, and just ever since I've been, full on a cryptocurrency person. And so a couple of years later, around 2013, I was working on ways to make Bitcoin better. The idea I had at the time was like, if we used storage instead of electricity, maybe it'd be less wasteful and more scalable, both of which are, I no longer think are the case. But in the process of trying to solve that problem, me and my co-founder discovered a way to build a cloud storage platform that we felt could be superior both in price and performance to AWS. And so when we had that, we were like, well, this seems like a $20 billion opportunity. We should turn this into a company. So that's really where the Sia of today was born. It has this kind of, experimental, random background. But then once we found it, we refined it into being a decentralized platform that aims to give users the cloud experience without requiring users to use a cloud provider. Just like Bitcoin gives you money without a bank or without a central bank, Sia gives you a cloud without a central cloud provider. And then the rest of it was just about figuring out how to make it competitive with AWS. Because for us, decentralized isn't good enough. It also has to be comparable to what people are used to, or superior, ideally superior to what people are used to.
It's an awesome journey. I used to cover or co-cover Amazon at Oppenheimer on the equity research side, not on the tech side, more on the financial side, obviously. But, I always talk to people about AWS, and I don't know if people truly understand their scale, like how much data they process, how big their data centers are, the latency, the low cost, the hundreds of products they roll out each year. So, I mean, what you're taking on is definitely no small task.
Yeah, and it's certainly not, we don't expect to be Amazon's size by the end of this year. But I do think that we have the superior technology, and that as we start to build that snowball and get more developers interested, we will get to a point where we have the momentum that's needed to actually overcome Amazon and Amazon's scale and Amazon's product force.
That's awesome. I mean, just before we dive into the details, what's the overarching thesis for you on kind of re-architecting the internet here and take on AWS? Like, do you think that at a high level, AWS is too restrictive, or, it's centralized, or do you think that the costs are too high, or it's just not as performant as you would like? Like, what are, I guess, the key attributes that you're looking to improve on?
Yeah, so I think there are two major things that I care about. One is openness. So Amazon is a closed platform. Like for example, if you want to add a new feature into AWS, you can't submit a pull request for that. You have to make a feature request and wait for Amazon to deal with it. Or if you want to, change how something works, AWS is this closed system. You can't. It has to be Amazon's vision. And I think that is super harmful for innovation. And so we've seen with Bitcoin. We've seen with the open source world, even before cryptocurrency, just open source in general, when you open things up and allow tinkerers to mess around just because they have an idea, the amount of innovation you get substantially, just like overwhelmingly outpaces anything that a single centralized entity or corporation could ever do. And we're seeing that now with Ethereum in DeFi. The amount of DeFi innovation that's happening and the amount of like new financial just technology relative to what, say, like the closed world of Wall Street can do is staggering. And so we think that by opening things up, making everything open source, making everything full access to everyone, any tinkerer can come in and try something new. We are going to make an innovation center for cloud technology that just completely blows away anything that Amazon or Google or Microsoft are able to keep up with. So that's kind of one side of things. And then the second side of things is it comes down to security. And people are starting to realize that when you put everything on Amazon, that gives Amazon a substantial amount of leverage over you. And I think, this is being felt in like the content creator world. People on YouTube are subject to these arbitrary terms of service and arbitrary monetization policies that are essentially set by advertisers. YouTube content creators get paid only if their content is quote unquote on brand with whoever's paying for the ad revenue. And so you have this like centralized control and centralized leverage that prevents creators and developers from being able to fully express themselves. They have to fit inside the acceptable boxes of the corporations they're signed up with. And so by switching to something decentralized, you completely get away from that. Nobody has leverage over you. And it's basically about you and your users. And as long as you're filling a need for your users, you have a way to make a living, and you don't have to worry about these middlemen who have their own criteria.
That's awesome. I really like that. And there's a lot to unpack there. So on your first point, you talked about openness. Like, I guess from the outside looking in, a lot of people look at storage as kind of, for lack of a better word, like dumb infrastructure, right? Like you have it, it's to store data and you just want it to work. What are like some of the features that developers could build like on Sia that you can on AWS? Like I'm just trying to dig into like how they would be able to edit and make it better that they can't do on AWS, because it's really hard to like understand that from the outside.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of something that has happened in real time. So Skynet's been out for less than 2 months. And when we launched Skynet, the question of live streaming came up. And we said, well, probably in 6 to 9 months, we'll be able to support live streaming. Like we know how to do it, but we can't do it on the technology we released today. And then we hosted a hackathon, and one of the hackathon contributors came up with this novel solution to do live streaming on the code that we had released. And so now Skynet has live streaming. And so in an Amazon world, that just wasn't possible. You wouldn't have gotten this new feature built into S3 by someone in a hackathon. Whereas in this open world where anyone can come in and play with whatever they want, we were able to get as a community live streaming. And that's something that the dev team hadn't expected and hadn't planned for. And so that, that was super exciting to us because it's like, oh, wow, it's working.
That's huge. And for those who don't know, Skynet's your decentralized content delivery network. This is similar to like Akamai, which would be a public company.
Yeah, so I would think of Skynet more as like a public data layer. So Sia is the storage layer, and it's how it's what stores and protects data. And then Skynet is the access layer, and it allows any person to download any file on Sia as long as they have the encryption keys and the other authorizations needed. And so before Skynet, if you wanted to share a file with a friend, it was really difficult. But now that Skynet's in place, it's super easy to share a file with a friend. And this goes much beyond file sharing. As a like open public data layer, what it means is that you can build applications where the entire application lives on Skynet. And this application has access to all the Skynet APIs of like uploading and downloading and access. And so that means that you can build, in theory, like an entire decentralized YouTube that lives exclusively on Skynet. You're not hosting any servers yourself. Your users aren't like hosting any nodes themselves. Everyone's just using this decentralized infrastructure layer. And I think that is so much more powerful than any platform we have today.
That's awesome. You guys are literally building out the stack in real time, which is really fun to watch.
It's really fun to do.
I bet. And so earlier you also brought up security. So that's a lot to unpack. So I guess the naive view is that AWS is really secure. They're all around the world. We don't really hear about any hacks or anything on the AWS side of things, more on like the app side of things or in the browser or in the consumer facing apps that are hosted on AWS. How do you think through competing with the giants on security?
Yeah, so we use a couple of standard techniques to achieve security. As a data layer, really like the big tool that we have to protect things is encryption. And so everything is encrypted by default unless the intention is to publish it. And then, of course, it's not encrypted because you want people to be able to see it. And then beyond that, it really does come down, similar to AWS, to the application, carefully controlling and managing their secrets. And again, this is something that we expect third-party services or third-party app developers to set up around. They have access to all the primitives. They can build security layers on top of it and like security modules on top of Skynet for, say, corporations to use. So this is, access layers and stuff like that are things that we're building out, again, in real time. But the core element of security really just comes down to encryption and making sure that the right people have the encryption keys.
That makes sense. And I guess one thing I hear about a lot in crypto, and this might be a naive question for you, is that, and I don't know if this is the right question, but traditional Web 2 apps store their data for their users on AWS. It sounds like in crypto and blockchain, users are the ones storing on AWS, but they hold the keys. I think this is somewhat of Blockstack's kind of strategy. Is that the right way to think about that? And, I guess, how do you think through that idea?
Yeah, so I think that's how, before Skynet, decentralized apps were approaching it. And like Blockstack is forced to use AWS because they've been unable to build a decentralized alternative to AWS. And so users holding the keys, like on one level makes sense, but on another, if Amazon has the data, Amazon has the off switch. And like one of the reasons we named Skynet is because it has no off switch. And so if you're using something like Skynet over something like AWS, you can have confidence that as long as you're paying for the data is going to be there. In terms of the user-centric model, though, that's absolutely correct. Decentralization and the things we do at Sia are all about giving the user control over what happens and ensuring that there is no counterparty who can make decisions or enact consequences on behalf of the user. The user has to engage in every activity. And so what this means is that like when you store content or when you publish content, you do it yourself. When you consume content, you pay yourself. And this actually lends into a scalability element. So for example, on the centralized web, if you publish a video on your own website and then that video gets 200 million views, Amazon's going to send you a bandwidth bill for like $800,000, and it's going to be a terrible experience. So if you want to push viral content today, you have to go through a centralized platform like YouTube or Facebook, who's going to eat the content costs for you, but then also consume all the ad revenue for you and consume other types of revenue. On Skynet, it's the consumer that pays for the bandwidth. That means that as a creator, if you put out something that goes and gets 200 million views, there's no cost to you. You're not paying for every time someone views the video. And in fact, if you're part of the incentive scheme, users may be paying you, and you may be making significant revenue, even absent ads or product placement, from your popular content.
That's awesome. That's really cool to think about. And I guess I'm just wondering though, like, do you think that we'll get to a point where governments start censoring AWS data or go after Amazon? Like, I'm always trying to think like 10, 25, 50 years down the line. Like, I don't know if AWS is big in, China or Asia, or if people could access it. Like, I'm always trying to think through that permanent, data layer and what that means for people that live in, repressed regimes or tough countries. How do you think through that?
Yeah, I think especially recently, we've seen increasing action on behalf of content platforms to proactively censor content. And it's something that I've been very unhappy with. So I think the most recent example would be this COVID-19 article that someone put out on Medium. It gained a lot of traction.
Yeah.
It had a lot of problems with it, but it wasn't illegal. And it wasn't like, some insane appeal to conspiracy. It was just a misinformed person making, arguments in favor of their opinion, and those arguments just happened to be incorrect. And so Medium ended up taking down the article, which I think was a massive overstep because this content is not, it's not illegal. It's not posted in bad faith. It's not trying to convince people, to join a cult or something. I think that the content should have stayed there, and the proper response is more content that refutes the arguments. And we've seen this happening more on YouTube. We're seeing it happening more on Facebook, this big push against fake news. And I think that that's a substantial threat to reasonable conversation on the internet.
You bring up a really good point. And, I think it's kind of a dated argument to bring up now, but people always, when crypto first got started, people always used to bring up the idea, what if you have some really, horrible video that shouldn't be on there that's on the web forever, like on a decentralized storage layer? I guess, how do you think through those risks? Like, is that worth, allowing the entire world access to a free data layer for these, few instances where it might backfire? I mean, in my opinion, it is worth it to give the world that, but wondering what you think.
Yeah. So at a super high level, I agree with you in that I think technology moves the world forward. And especially something like this, the amount of freedom that it unlocks for your average person is substantially outweighs the amount of harm that it unlocks for the small collection of bad actors. But I also think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy. I think that having this, free open data layer doesn't mean that we have to embrace bad content being published. We can still put controls in place that people can opt into. For example, the US government could just publish blacklists of files, and people can opt into that blacklist, make sure that they're protected. And whether it's the US government or some other entity, users have the ability to control how content is being filtered for them. And I think the user control, again, comes down to the important thing. We want to make sure that it's not Medium deciding what I'm allowed to read. I'm deciding what I'm allowed to read, and I'm deciding what sort of filters are put in place for me. And I think that if you combine this open technology with responsible filtering, I think most users will opt into the filtering, and most of the harm that's done by this that people are worried about actually gets completely mitigated.
Yeah, filtering is a good point. I mean, I guess everybody thinks about this as like what it's like now. They don't really think about how the product could improve over time. Curation, filtering, things like that.
For sure.
So, a lot of this comes down to costs, right? So I keep bringing up AWS just because they're the, the giant in the room. And I think it's good for you guys to have that narrative in a way. But AWS is really cheap, right? So like for 50 terabytes, you can get, it's under 2 cents per gig on AWS just for standard storage. If you do like Glacier storage or something that's really long term, it gets really, really cheap. It's like 0.00099, cents per gigabyte. It's really, really low. How do you think about competing on price with AWS, or is that not too important for you because you have, potentially more redundancy or something like that?
Yeah, so I'm going to scale up the prices to per terabyte because then instead of talking about fractions of a penny, we're talking about dollars.
Yeah, way easier.
And Sia, of course, is a like a warm/hot storage network. So we don't want to compare to Glacier because, the access times are real time. So why would we compare ourselves to a service where it takes 12 hours to access a file?
It takes 12 hours on Glacier? You can't access until then?
Yeah, I think it's like 8 to 12 hours.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like, all the cost saving measures they did means that it's difficult to access data. And that's why it's called Glacier, because it's really slow.
Oh, wow. So that's for stuff that you would potentially really never even need to access at the end of the day.
Exactly. So for S3, you call it really cheap, but it's about $20 per terabyte per month. And if you go on Newegg and you search up hard drives, you will find that you can buy, like, say, a 6 terabyte hard drive for $120. So that comes down to $20 per terabyte. So on Amazon, when you're paying for cloud storage on Amazon, you're essentially paying the entire cost of buying a new hard drive for that data every single month.
Jesus.
And so I don't see that as cheap at all.
No, you're right. To be honest, I didn't know that's just such a clear comparison. I guess I didn't really put that in perspective. I guess the thing though is, I guess people assume that these costs will go down over time. And the other thing is, like, AWS is hosting it. So if you need, 1,000 terabytes, you wouldn't have to go, store all these hard drives in your house or something.
Yeah, and certainly there are a lot of conveniences to what AWS does. So for Sia, prices are about 1/10 the price of AWS. So instead of $20 per terabyte per month, it's $2 per terabyte per month. And this is much more in line with what seems reasonable if you look at the cost of a hard drive and how long it takes to, how long that hard drive is going to operate and the computer to house it and everything else. $2 per terabyte per month feels more in line with what a good price should be. And Sia is able to hit this by being an open marketplace. So hosts are in constant competition with each other. Only the best and cheapest hosts get selected for data storage. So your revenue really depends on you being able to compete with the guy next to you. And this puts a constant downward pressure on the price and a constant upward pressure on things like speed and latency.
That's incredible. The price difference is insane.
Hey guys, I also wanted to tell you about ZenLedger, the best tax software for cryptocurrency investors and accountants. It's fast and easy to use, and you can get all of your crypto transactions in one place so you can trade smarter and optimize your taxes. ZenLedger offers 24/7 customer support by phone, email, or chat to help you get your taxes done stress-free, and it comes with a 100% money-back guarantee because they know you'll love it. ZenLedger is giving an exclusive 15% discount to our listeners when you use coupon code CHAIN15. Go to zenledger.io, linked in the show notes below, to get started and get your taxes done fast.
Does a lot of the pricing come back to, though, like, I feel like the world is moving towards cloud storage, right? Like, I don't have that much storage on my phone anymore because I have a 200 gigabyte iCloud plan. Do you think that the latent storage that people have to allocate to the side network is going down? Or I guess, how do you think about that long-term trend?
Yeah, so I think that the Sia network is going to follow a pattern similar to Bitcoin mining, where early on it was like latent CPUs, and then later on latent GPUs, and then you needed special custom GPU rigs, and then you needed ASICs. And then, today ASICs don't even help. You need a data center, but like in 2017, you needed a data center. Today, you need a top tier, one of the best suited for Bitcoin mining data centers in the world, or you're just not going to be able to compete. And so you had this crazy specialization where, remarkably, even as Bitcoin mining got away from, this is kind of free to me because I have free electricity and I have a GPU anyway, that is no longer competitive with the true, full scale specialized mining data centers of today. And I think Sia is going to go exactly the same way. Today, we depend a lot on this kind of latent opportunistic storage, but more that revenue comes in and the more the Sia network grows, we're going to see that professionalize. And professionals are going to be able to outcompete both in price and performance the just happens to be available storage today.
That's incredible. How long do you think it'll take before, let's say everything goes well, how long until somebody like literally builds a data center for Sia storage?
Yeah, so believe it or not, at least one group already has. They built a 1,000 terabyte data center specifically for Sia. I think this is about 2 years ago. We'll probably start to see more of that, I think, in the next 5 years. I think that the amount of data on the network really has to hit a large multiple of where it is today, maybe 100 to 1,000x the amount of data that's on the network today to start to justify professionals moving in. But I do think we'll get there in the next, 3 to 5 years.
That's awesome. I'm kind of wondering, why doesn't AWS just outsource some of the storage to you guys at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, and I think that once the Sia network has gained credibility as a reliable platform, that's incredibly likely that professional data centers today might just start selling on Sia because it gets them more revenue, and then they'll move their cloud offerings to being Sia based, because then instead of having access to their private limited network, they have access to this massive global network.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I guess the other question for you is on the Sia coin. Like, how does I really didn't dive into the token before the podcast, but how does that play into the cost dynamics on the network? Like, is the coin's price subsidizing these lower costs, or is there any interplay there?
Yeah, so when we set the network up, we wanted to make sure that the cost of storage would be independent of the cost of Sia coin, because we know, we knew in 2015. Now it's even more obvious. Like the cost of a cryptocurrency, or the price of a cryptocurrency, goes wildly up and down throughout its lifetime, and it has these massive boom and bust cycles. And we wanted to make sure that like people renting storage and people making a living off of selling storage would not be subject to these boom and bust cycles. So basically, what happens is if the price of Sia goes up, hosts will reduce the number of Sia coins that they ask for when selling storage. And then if the price of Sia coin goes down, hosts will increase the number of Sia coins that they ask for when selling storage. So we made sure those two things are actually independent.
That makes a lot of sense. And I missed one question going back to the growth, like your roadmap to data centers for people. Do you think that you'll get to a point, and I mean, you have a ton of experience with mining from your work at Obelisk and being in the space so long. Do you think that you'll get to a point where you may want to partner with a product company and, provide like a Helium-like or a CoinMine-like, device that sits on somebody's desktop? Or at the end of the day, like, is that not really worth it because you just be selling hard drives?
Yeah, I think certainly devices to sit on people's desks, I don't think are the way to go. I think if you wanted to do that, you'd want to go heavy into economies of scale. And I also think that's a place we don't need to intervene. One thing, though, that I am interested in is, imagine selling a Wi-Fi router that also had a Skynet node on it. And so just by buying our router, you get access to Wi-Fi, and then you get access to all of Skynet. And any device you have can go visit any Skynet link, and you don't need any special software. You don't, nothing else. Just the internet router is a Skynet enabled router, and it just kind of all happens magically. So that is a sort of device that I think we're super interested in. Is like pairing devices that serve you internet infrastructure today with technology that unlocks new pieces of the internet or new components of the internet. And it's easy to imagine like bundling in, say, Handshake as well. Why stop at Skynet? Let's go ahead and bake into these routers a couple of decentralized technologies for people to really make use of.
That's super interesting to think about. And so would Skynet, like, would that house like a portion of the Sia storage data? Like, what exactly would be on Skynet that helps people? Like it's so close to the user at the end of the day. Like, how does that speed up their interaction?
Yeah. So the Skynet node would not be for storing data. It would be for accessing data. It would have all the software that you need to go and download things off of Skynet. In terms of access speeds, you should really think of the Sia network as like this giant edge network. And so you have a bunch of nodes. They're located all over the world. They're in competitive places. They're trying to be as low latency as possible. And so you end up with something that honestly looks very similar to Akamai's network, where all the data is stored at the edge, and nodes are kind of picking the regions that make the most sense for the content that they're distributing. And so I would actually think of those as like two separate elements. You have, and I think this is actually one big key idea for Sia as a whole that's different from most peer-to-peer networks. Sia deliberately splits the roles of hosting content and like providing infrastructure from the role of consuming content. And so in a network like, say, IPFS, if someone, on a crappy internet connection starts running a bunch of Raspberry Pis on IPFS's network, this can actually have adverse performance effects on IPFS because now data is routing through these really slow, crappy nodes. But with Sia, data naturally gravitates towards the high performance nodes, and the people who are serving data are completely different from the people who are consuming data. And of course, we make up for that gap with money. So the people consuming data just make payments instead of offering infrastructure. And I think this is a key idea that allows Sia to be highly performant.
Yeah, the efficiency of the nodes and the selection is super interesting. I mean, Akamai spent years building that out, and it really works well too, which is great to think about. And just switching gears from AWS and Akamai, which are massive public companies doing billions in revenue every quarter, you have that on one side, which I think is awesome that you guys have these public comps to look to and compare to. I think that's great. A lot of crypto projects don't have that, but you also have competitors on the crypto side. You have StorageJ, STORJ. You have Filecoin, which, are they going to launch? We'll see, right? How do you think about your competition on more of the crypto side of things?
Yeah, so definitely in terms of Filecoin, it doesn't seem like they're close to launching. They keep putting out dates that are relatively close, but then they caveat that with saying like, well, we're saying a date that's soon because we don't want to say a date that's far away. That kind of indicates to you that the real internal date is probably far away. So we don't, we keep an eye on Filecoin because we don't want to be blindsided, but we've been watching the tech, we've been watching the research, and they have a lot of big research problems that they still haven't solved several years later, and don't seem to be close to solving those. So I really don't consider Filecoin to be a viable technology. And then I think storage fails the decentralization test, which is that if storage were to turn off all of their infrastructure tomorrow, every node that storage is running gets shut down tomorrow, do users notice? And I think the answer is yes. I think that most storage users, at the very least, would not be getting paid, but I think it's also the case that they wouldn't be able to access their files anymore. Whereas on Sia and Skynet, if you turn off all of Nebulous's nodes and servers tomorrow, the biggest thing that happens is the websites go down. But everybody else who's running, like the Nebulous websites, go down. But everything else keeps running. You can still upload data. You can still download data. If you don't use the website, you're not even going to notice. And of course, we have mirrors that are community run, and those mirrors don't shut down. So those elements of Skynet also continue to exist. And so I think that's very important that we really want to build technology that people know serves them. If you have a company that can shut down the technology that you depend on, that company has leverage over you. And I think that puts storage like cleanly in a different category than what Sia is doing.
So even if you decided tomorrow that you wanted to go surfing for the rest of your life and never work on Sia again, Sia would still live on for users and anybody storing data.
Yep. Anybody who's using it today would continue to be able to use it in the exact same way with the exact same speeds tomorrow after I walk away and start surfing.
Or whatever your favorite sport is.
Yeah.
So,
Beat Saber.
Yeah, that's exactly. So I guess the other thing to think about is that kind of your philosophy for the internet going forward, right? Like, I guess, how do you think through the true version of Web3? Because it's a very convoluted stack right now. You guys are obviously a key part of that. Like, do the apps change on top? I always like to get people's take here because there is a lot of invisible stuff that goes on that people are okay with because these services are free and their friends are on it. Like, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on all of them as well. How do you kind of think through the future of the internet and how you guys play into it?
So I think it's very early for Web3. I think a lot of the ideas that we see today are probably going to change substantially over the next 3 years. But I also feel like, especially with Skynet, we've just crossed the turning point from Web3 tech really isn't viable to Web3 tech is now quite viable. And people haven't completely realized that yet, but we're about to enter this period of massive growth. And if I look a little bit further down and like what should Web3 look like? To me, what Web3 means is that everything is open. So as a user, I can access any data I want and any application I want and any community that I want. And if I want to export data or move data between communities or share data between communities, that's super easy to do. And like a counterexample to that today is like the data, the images, everything that's on Facebook. That's really difficult to export from Facebook. You can't, Facebook has controls. They don't have APIs, and it's all these walled gardens: Twitter and Twitch and YouTube, and I think that the Web3 should be much more open than that. But I also think that in Web3, on the publisher side, you should just be able to throw something out. And so on the internet today, if you're a publisher, you have to worry about infrastructure. So either you find an infrastructure partner like, say, YouTube or AWS, and you pay them, or you have to host the infrastructure yourself, which is a huge pain and a huge barrier. And it's one of the reasons that something like YouTube has gained so much traction is because they handle all the pains of infrastructure for their content creators. So Web3 should be a system where creators can just publish things and they don't have to worry about the infrastructure. The infrastructure is handled by Web3. And then I think finally, there should be this payment element where it's like if you publish something that gets widely consumed, you should just get paid for that. And you shouldn't need ads. I'm actually huge anti-ad person. I think it's, that's a whole podcast of its own. But I think it's corrupt, and it's like mind poison. I think you can call advertising mind poison or brain control. And I think that it should be possible to monetize without ads, and that it should just be automatic. If you create something that adds value to a bunch of people's lives, you should just automatically get paid for doing that without having to insert things like product placement. And so with Skynet, that's the world we're trying to get to, where infrastructure is taken care of for the creator. There's no off switches. Everything's open access, and people get paid for contributing without needing to worry about advertising or product placement or terms of service.
That's a really good narrative. I like that. Do you feel that the world, I guess at least in the East, because we're here, I don't know as much about the West, to be honest. Do you feel that we are kind of, in this dystopian world where ads and Facebook and all of this, sway our decisions and control our thoughts? Or do you think that that might be too dystopian of a view? Because it really is hard, I think, for people in aggregate to really think about that topic. And honestly, I don't know if they even care, to be honest.
Yeah. So I do. I think it's not as bad as it could be. I think it's getting worse. And I think one of the things that society and corporations have gotten really good at is kind of slipping things under people's noses. And they've found ways to introduce these highly invasive things to people without people getting upset about it. And I mean, the personal gripe of mine is the smartphone. I parked my car at a friend's house 70 miles away and, didn't tell Apple anything about it. And then like a week ago, Apple sent me a notification that's like, hey, do you want to go pick up your car? And then it pointed to where my car had parked. And like, I had never told Apple what my car was. That like, how did Apple know that I drove my car out there instead of hitched a ride with a friend? How did it know that when I came home I wasn't in my car? And eventually, I assume that it's somehow connected to the Bluetooth radio. It knows my car. It knows the Bluetooth radio that I play music out of, and so it's just like so. But I'm not sure. But it was just like this really creepy thing where it's like, your smartphone follows you around. Google knows every person's home that you've been to. It knows every bar you've been to, and it's like this amazingly invasive tracking, and that's something that could be used for substantial evil if Google flipped a switch. And one of the things that I worry about actually is elections. Google controls so much mind share through both its search algorithm and its like YouTube content curation algorithm that if Google decided a certain person is going to win the election, they can just tune the weights on their search criteria to favor that candidate and ensure that candidate wins the election. They can give them, they control all the exposure, and they can make sure that candidate has all the exposure they need.
Some serious Big Brother stuff. I mean, you said if Google flipped the switch, I mean, would we even know if they flipped the switch?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, is Google biasing towards one candidate or another? And that's something we don't have a good answer to.
It's crazy to think that we don't even have that, basic level of insight. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I do think we're in a dystopian world. We don't know if the big actors are making use of these dystopian controls, but 100% these dystopian controls exist.
Yeah, it's funny to think how big the macro trends are for you guys. Like whether governments get more repressive or whether the big data and application companies get more repressive, it's both bullish for you guys in decentralized storage.
For sure, and it's really important to me. I really don't like living under this pressure that I feel from governments and from big data and from just the megacorps of the world. And so I want to build an escape valve and a way to participate in the internet without being under the control of these giants.
For sure. And David, last couple of questions for you, just on Sia's progress so far. You guys have, I believe, 2 petabytes of storage capacity already. About half that's being used. So I guess how's traction been on Sia? Sorry, I mispronounced that. How's traction been on Sia, and what's next steps for you guys? Building off Skynet as well.
Yeah. So traction's been great for Sia. We've been growing at a very, very comfortable, steady rate over the past year and a half. And we're definitely looking to push that forward. I will make a note on the capacity. We've done surveys of our hosts multiple times, and the results always come back that actually most of the capacity of the Sia network is just unplugged. So that's not going to show up on any metrics, but 2,000 terabytes is a substantial underestimate of how much storage could be on the network in a month from now if there was that much demand.
Oh, got it. So there's like some game theory here on those that have storage capacity might not want to plug in because the amount they earn would go down.
Yeah, they just because you don't get paid for plugging storage in, you get paid when people decide to use the storage. And so a network that is, at 5% utilization, if 100% of that is turned on, then 100% of that is drawing electricity and is wasting. And so if most of that goes away, and you only run 10% of the network to store 5% of the data, that's just much more cost efficient. So that's why we see the numbers that we do.
That's interesting. So if I went on tomorrow, so your storage capacity says 2 petabytes, you said that it's probably a lot more than that because a lot of it's unplugged. If I went on tomorrow and I wanted to store, 5x that amount with some, movie theater business I have, what would storage providers get alerted that they need to plug in? Like, how does that communication happen, I guess?
Yeah, we have a couple channels over which we communicate to our storage providers. And basically, for example, we actually do have a company that's spinning up and putting a bunch of video footage, CCTV footage, onto the Sia network. The amount of footage that they have to migrate is substantially more than the total amount of data on the network today. And so as that migration starts, we'll actually get to see that unfold in real time. And basically, worst come to worst, we, the Sia team, are in touch with enough of our hosts that we can just get on the phone. But more realistically, what's going to happen is we send out an email that's like, hey, there's money now. And we're starting to run out of space. If you have extra space, just turn it on and plug it in and you'll get paid at this point. And I think that's all we need to do. So obviously, we're not going to send that email until we're at the point where we're running out of space. But Yeah, we've made sure that we have at least 10x more storage that we can get with just a simple email and basically a community reach out.
That's incredible. And one of my last questions for you, do you think that Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS, do you think that you guys are on his radar yet?
Yes, we've talked to AWS a number of times, and they have told us that they are paying attention. They're very impressed with the tech. And at this point, they don't think it's possible to compete with Amazon. But I think as time goes on, they're starting to clue in that this decentralization is competitive. But we know we're on the AWS radar. We've talked to AWS teams before who are definitely keeping an eye on us.
Do you think that like AWS could roll something out, like if you have free storage plugged into the AWS network and earn money? Or I'm just wondering, like key risks there. Like that would seem like one, but it would also destroy their current margins that they charge now. So I don't know if they would ever do that.
Yeah, so I don't think it's possible for Amazon to roll out a product like Sia. Everything that Amazon does is about bringing control to Amazon. And also just the way they engineer, everything that Amazon does is about these ultra high reliability data centers. And so those are like two core DNA structural things just baked into how Amazon operates that are extremely different in Sia. Sia is all about rejecting control, making sure that the user has every ounce of control. That's something Amazon just can't do, doesn't know how to do, will never be able to transition to. And then also, Sia is all about combining a large number of low reliability data centers into this ultra high reliability data layer, whereas Amazon has ultra high reliability data centers, and weaknesses in those really impacts their infrastructure as a whole. Like one data center going down will take out an entire region for AWS. Whereas on Sia, one data center going down, nobody blinks because that happens literally every day. We lose hosts every single day, and this does not impact uptime or reliability or speeds on the Sia network. It's the two entities are just built so differently that I think it's impossible for Amazon to do what we do.
That's a really cool way to frame it. I hate to say this, but it sounds like World War III would be good for business for you guys. I really don't hope it happens, but
yeah, maybe good for business, not good for my life, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I totally agree, David. This has been this is awesome. I'm waiting to have an episode where we could talk about existing major business like AWS and how they compare to startups like you guys that are doing incredible work. Where could people follow you and learn more about Sia and potentially provide storage to the network too?
Yeah, so the best place to learn more is sia.tech, or if you want to learn about Skynet, which is our fastest growing product. It's got over 1 million files on it now on the public network. You can go to siasky.net. And then if you want to get involved with the community, most of the Sia community is on Discord at discord.gg/SIA. So discord.gg/Sia. And we love new faces. We'd love to meet you guys and work with you to build something cool.
That's awesome, David. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please support the show by hitting subscribe on iTunes, writing a review, or sharing this episode on Twitter and LinkedIn. And stay tuned for our next episode out soon.